We're back with another episode of the Beyond Business podcast, and today we're sitting down with Steve Roskamp. He's the owner and founder of Achilles Consulting, and he has a 30-plus year career of helping people build and work on better relationships. That started in the context of therapy, but now with Achilles Consulting, he's looking at helping leaders identify blind spots and weak points that they may not know are there that could have detrimental effects, but if they're addressed, can lead to freedom and better businesses and leadership. If those are things you're interested in and you want to grow more in those areas, join us. It's going to be a great conversation. Steve, it's a pleasure to talk with you today. I'm quite excited for this conversation. I know we've had some great one-on-one conversations in the past, but you are a wealth of knowledge in the space of leadership and consulting. So excited to dive in, and we'll see if I can rein myself in and not go for an hour.
All right.
So obviously, like I said in the intro, you have a pretty historic background, and I think, as you said in your little ebook, 30 plus years of just working with people and helping people. Mm-hmm. So I think a helpful starting point is maybe talking about Achilles Consulting Group. Obviously, that name has a connotation and a meaning to it. So can you explain why you chose that for your particular consulting path and the vision you have behind that?
Sure, yeah. It's interesting with Achilles, because if you say that name, and do a word association, almost automatically people will associate with Achilles the word heel. But Achilles was considered one of the greatest warriors in Greek mythology, but nobody knows him for that.
Right.
He's known for his weak spot that took him out. And there's a fascinating backstory, we won't go into that today, about how that all developed, the Greek mythology around that story. So he's a terrific warrior, had a weak spot, it took him out. Well, I've seen this over and over again in leadership, in the organizations, secular and church-oriented organizations, over and over again, where high-level leaders, there are areas in their life they don't deal with, they don't address, they don't take care of, and at some point it can severely negatively impact their leadership. Sometimes just the functioning of the organizations, and sometimes all the way to the degree where they blow up their career, they blow up their families, in their personal life, because they haven't taken care of some weak spots, some blind spots in their life that are affecting how they lead. I had that experience myself. I went through that. I was a leader within an organization, and I blew up that career and had to move on to something else. I was fortunate in not losing my family and some of the people around me, but I had to make some significant life changes. And I did that, did a lot of work to overcome some of those things. And as I began thinking about entering into the coaching world at the recommendation of a number of people that knew me well, I was talking with a friend of mine and who was in branding and marketing, and he says, you need to leverage your story in doing that, because there are too many leaders, and he was also in the business world and worked with a lot of business leaders who were on the edge of blowing up their careers or their families, or already have, and they need to address those things. And so he said, you really should leverage your own personal story in the work that you do. And then in talking with him, that's where we developed and came up with the name Achilles Consulting Group, and addressing the blind spots that can take out leaders and do frequently. So,
yeah, that's great. Obviously, with this particular podcast, we're trying to drive a lot of value for the business owner and entrepreneur. So I think that's a great framing of some further conversation we'll have about getting practical and diving into that. So one of the things that struck me again in your little ebook you provide, and we'll have a way for people to find that in the show notes here, but I think it was the very last page, and I'll probably misquote because I won't have exactly, but something to the effect of, the most difficult person that you'll lead in life is yourself.
yes.
Can you elaborate? Because that struck me. That definitely caught my eye. Can you elaborate on that a little more, and why that captured you for playing into this larger ebook of finding these leadership blind spots?
Sure. Yeah, and it's interesting. I wish I could claim that quote, and I can't. But,
Sure.
The reality of that is, for most of us, and particularly with, I think, higher level leaders as you move into leadership, even with, the desire to help people and to build a business and this type of thing, often we don't take the time to invest in our own story and who we are. We've grown that, and we kind of know that. We get out there, we have different opportunities, and we go after them. And to take the time to step back, to be brutally honest with what's going on internally, that's a hard thing to do. To look in the mirror in an honest way and say, what's going on for me? Why did I react this way? Why am I pushing after this or chasing after this particular thing? We can convince ourselves of the righteousness of it, that it's good, but there's another cliche often that leaders can work really hard to climb the ladder only when they get to the top and they realize the ladder's on the wrong wall. And they need to make a shift. And that level of, I think, personal honesty, being willing to lead yourself first and take a hard look, is something that often doesn't occur early in a career. And then I think later in a career, it's almost too, frightening is the right word. It's too difficult to do it. And so we just hope we're going to keep going and hope everything will be okay. And so that, I think, captures, I don't want to ramble here now, but,
Sure.
That idea that, the most difficult person we got to lead is taking the time to look at self.
Sure.
And that's important. Yep.
Yeah, as I'm sure you can attest, I'm sure there's all sorts of data and studies and things that show that if you're a company leader and you're trying to institute a certain culture or way of doing things, but you're not living it yourself, you're never going to win the people over.
Yeah, there's another statement that says you can never take anybody further than what you've gone yourself. And so if you haven't looked at your own triggers, the things that drives you both in a positive way and in a negative way, and gotten a good grasp of that, then if you've got some of those same things popping up in team members, you're not going to be able to really help them grow either. You can't take anybody farther than what you've gone yourself. And that has a significant impact, I think, for business leaders and the teams that they seek to lead and guide.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's very relatable, obviously, as you've well seen, from the startup entrepreneur to somebody who's maybe leading a company of 500 to thousands of people. The day-to-day just stress, things pop up. You feel like sometimes you're in survival mode and not necessarily thriving. And so the intentional time to carve out that space to actually identify what are my blind spots and how are they there. So maybe we can dive into that practical side of the language of blind spots or the Achilles heel of someone. Obviously, again, I'll probably reference this a few times, but in the book, it's a blind spot because we can't see it. So can you talk through some of the practical things you offer or have even laid out in that particular resource of how to identify those? Because it's blind, so it's probably hard. We're not going to be able to just sit back and be like, oh, that's what it is. You know, it takes some work to get there.
Sure, and we can break this down as we go, but as I thought about that and my experience over the years, both as a mental health therapist and then as a business consultant and business executive coach, I've recognized that there are really three areas where those blind spots occur, and part of recognizing them, part of becoming, bringing them into awareness is just knowing where they are, and knowing that, oh, this can happen here. And as I was kind of developing this and thinking about it, as you can see in the book, it came down to 3 S's, which kind of surprised me because I wasn't planning to do that. The S's just appeared as I was writing it. And those S's are your story, your personal life story, that blind spots can hide there. Your strengths, the things that you're really good at, and that is surprising to a lot of people, that's where you can have blind spots that can negatively impact your leadership. And then the third is what we call saboteurs. And to make saboteur a little bit more real, it's your mind trash. It's those internal dialogue thoughts that we all struggle with, that we all have when you're laying in bed in the morning before you get up, when you're trying to get to sleep, when you wake up in the middle of the night. What are those internal voices that tend to be pretty critical, or that tell you you're screwing up, or you've done this wrong, or whatever the case may be, and getting a good feel for those. And so it's those 3 things. And it's, number one, recognizing that they're there. But then the other element is we all need to have at least a couple of people in our life that like us but aren't impressed with us. And I like to surround myself, in the past, I'd like to surround myself with people that are impressed with me, because then it makes me feel good. And I think we all have a tendency to do that because you get strokes and you do that, and if you're a business owner and you're successful, it feeds my ego.
Sure.
Right? But we need people that, like I said, like us but aren't impressed with us, so that they can challenge us, so that we have enough trust and we're vulnerable and we're open with, so we say, hey, you're coming off this way, or, you're impacting folks this way, to get that feedback that sometimes I'm not going to get. Because as a leader, and the people on my team, as wonderful a relationship we may have, if I'm still the leader, if I'm still the boss, it's going to be hard for them necessarily to give me the feedback that I need to identify and begin to look at some of those blind spots that can have a negative impact on my leadership.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very helpful breakdown. And I think, correct if I'm wrong, but as we're looking through the 3 S's, obviously the story one, again, there's some ways you provide that in the resource, but oftentimes I imagine it takes somebody who has some experience and knowledge to be able to walk you through that and identify those points. So in my opinion, it feels like the 2 that are impactful, and just from me going through the book and then taking the positive intelligence assessment, the strengths and saboteurs was probably the ones that immediately I saw the most actionable value out of. So if we can dive in there on the strength side, like you said, telling someone that their strength is a blind spot, it definitely is a little surprising.
Sure.
But then as you lay it out, it's really clear that I think you said the over operation or the extreme of that strength is where you start to lead into a little bit of unhealth. So can you unpack that a little bit and how it plays into the positive intelligence book and then the assessment with it of how it actually is helpful to identify what you're really good at and what an unhealthy extreme of that could look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of connections between all the elements, which I try to lay out in the ebook. For example, I am a people person. I enjoy interacting with people. One of my top strengths on one of the assessments I use shows that I'm sociable. And I use sociable to build trust, to build relationships, to build a comfort level that with people and with me. And so I'm very comfortable interacting. Chris and I were at a retreat last week, and I knew a lot of the people, but not all of them. And to interact, approach a new person, be sociable, interact, build relationships, that's something I'm comfortable with doing. In the work setting, if I overplay that, I can come and talk with somebody and start chit-chatting, and they've got other things to do, and they're focused on some other work, and it could feel very intrusive because, they've got stuff they've got to work on, and here I am chit-chatting about the weekend.
Sure.
And so that sociability, my being sociable, can be interpreted or experienced as being intrusive. Now, it may be that I am overdoing it, we call that I've overplaying it and I'm just not reading the room, so to speak. But it could also be that person, because they're not very sociable, or that's not a strength of theirs, and they have a different set of strengths and they're very focused on their work, they might have what we call a hypersensitive radar to, sociable when it starts to get pushed to the extreme a little bit. And so they may react to it more quickly than somebody else who has similar strengths as me, who would love to chit-chat. And we both have to, watch it so we can get our work done.
Yeah.
But so being aware of some of those things, and sometimes when those strengths that have worked very well for me, if they're not working, what's the thing we sometimes try to do? Well, it's not working, so let's just try harder. And that can be detrimental to the relationship.
Yeah.
A great example of that, before I talk about the connection to then the saboteurs, there was a leader I was working with, and she owned that people could come off as intrusive to her. So she put an egg timer on her desk that was like 15 minutes. And her whole team knew it, and they were fine with it. And when they came in to talk with her, she would flip it over. Hilarious. Yeah. And they had that much time to chit-chat. Yeah. But when the timer was gone, okay, it's done. Now we move on. And I did not know that when I was doing this presentation, but I knew the leader. Sure. And her whole team was there, and they started laughing, and then they shared that story with me. And I said, I'm going to use this from now on because it's a brilliant example of that. So, and how that ties into the saboteurs is we learn, and there's all kinds of brain science around the things we're describing when we talk about the saboteur assessment. And that's where I get really excited about it, because the relational things that I kind of knew over the years of my work is now getting proven by brain science and neuroscience, where they're studying, those voices, and they can determine what some of those are. Well, I have a high saboteur of being a people pleaser, which you could see fits easily with that strength of being sociable. And the people pleaser tells me that I have to make sure everybody around me likes me. And if that's the voice I'm hearing in my head, if that's that internal whisper, Steve, you're screwing up, because it's really important that Chris like you, or these people like you, or this direct report likes you. You can see how that may push the sociable strength into an intrusive strength. And that's where the connection begins to come in.
Yeah.
And so when I became aware of the positive intelligence material, did some training so I could become a coach with that, so I could help leaders look at themselves and look at how do the saboteurs drive your unhealthy behavior. Because what they do, those internal voices, they jump on your strengths and they abuse you with them. So that then your leadership is impacted in a negative way. And when I have leaders take that and they kind of look at it and they say, oh my goodness, it's so true.
Yeah.
I'm starting a new coaching client this afternoon after this assessment, who heard me speak on this last October, and he's been chewing on it since. And he finally reached out, and we're going to start doing some coaching work so that he can address and learn to how do we silence some of those saboteurs so they don't drive unhealthy behavior.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think that's a really good breakdown of how those things can interplay. And then, as you even alluded to, again, it feels like it's a lot more technical work to even just involve what story work could look like. But like you said, I think as you alluded to in the ebook, that people pleaser, like people need to like me, was driven from some rhythms of childhood. And so there's like these deep layers that then compound and grow as adults. So I wonder, maybe this is just a helpful practical breakdown, but when I went through the positive intelligence assessment, which I think is about 5 to 6 minutes, 50 questions, I think I told you before this, I was not surprised by the results, right? Top ones for me are conflict averse and people pleaser, or wanting to make like a peacemaker. I've known that about myself for a long time. But there's always continued work to do there. And as I was reflecting on it, again, I would highly encourage people to go look into this tool, because it'll give you a whole report. And as you well know, you can click into the top ones and it gives you a whole breakdown of like, here's where it goes well, here's what's unhealthy. And then I'm trying to remember, there was a section at the bottom of like, maybe it was like the unhealth, maybe you remember at the top of your head, of like the extremes. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I hate how much that's true. Or like how it can impact leadership. But looking at it for myself, as I've stepped into more of a manager leadership role in the past 4 years, I've noticed if I put off hard conversations, if I don't address things quickly that could turn into conflicts, it's always much worse.
Oh, of course.
And of course I can tell myself that, but there's been a lot of growth and work there to just like grab it, nip it in the butt right away, and just talk about it and get it out.
And
there.
that is so hard to do. So kudos to you.
Lifetime of work
for doing that. Well, and for me too, and I've been a therapist for, 23 years, and got out of the biz for a while and now back in, and it's still difficult. I have to make deliberate choices to have a difficult conversation with a leader, with someone I'm coaching, because there's still that voice, and it won't ever go away, but there's still that quiet voice that says you want the person you're coaching to like you. And if I get caught up with that, then I'm not going to be as good of a coach, as they need, because I might not say, if I'm coaching you, I might not say something to you that you need to hear.
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid if I do, you won't like me. If I could tell you a brief story about that, of the author of this book, it's wonderful, and I heard him share this story. He was working with 2 high-level leaders within 2 different organizations, and he had to have a difficult conversation with each one, and he didn't want to do it because he was afraid he would lose the work.
Yeah.
Well, he pressed into it. He recognized them as saboteurs. This is the author of the book, Positive Intelligence. And with one person, he had the difficult conversation, and he immediately got fired from that job. They reacted negatively and fired him. With the other person, he said, okay, I'm not going to do that here, and didn't have the conversation. with that client where he didn't have the conversation. Things went on, and 2.5 months later, she wrapped up the call, the work together, and they finished. A little shortly after that, about 3 months later, the first guy that fired him called him back. And I said, I need you in the organization, and brought him back in. And now he's been working. He had worked with them for like 3 or 4 more years because he said, yeah, I needed to hear those things, and I don't want to hear it the first time.
Sure.
But yeah, you were right on. And he called him back. They dug into those things, and then he continued to work throughout the organization. And so, like, yeah, you don't know what happens, but those conversations need to be had, and they're often hard to do.
Sure. Yeah, and the conversation I had with Dale Pierce last time, we were touching on more of his approach in the company chaplaincy, team care, culture officer role, but it's very similar. And this is kind of a good segue into, let's say somebody listening goes and takes this assessment, finds out, and maybe isn't surprised by their strengths and what that then plays into for saboteur language. What's the next practical piece? Obviously, some people may be interested in the coaching, but I think, again, as I saw in the book, sometimes it was just the humility to surround yourself with people who are not impressed by you, who are willing and inviting in that hard conversation. So maybe the practical question is, okay, I've done the assessment, I see the breakdown. How do I start inviting people into that, knowing it's going to be hard and maybe a little hurtful and difficult to hear these things, but I need to hear them as a leader to grow and identify the blind spots? Or even, how do I give the confidence and agency to the team around me, or whether it's my spouse or somebody else, to call these things out in a kind way?
A big piece of that, because you can ask for that. You can identify those 2 or 3 people, or a spouse even. It might be as much as it might be wonderful to do it with a spouse, it might be easier to do it with somebody you work with first, because there's a lot of other things that get wrapped up
Sure.
With a spouse. Believe me, I've been married for 45 years this summer. Actually 46 years this summer, make be sure I get that right, and did marriage therapy for a number of years.
Yeah.
And so it's great when you can get to that point with a spouse, but you may start with that trusted person around you, whether it's work or even outside of work. But once you've invited them to do it, then it's going to be very important what your reaction is. If I've invited you to give me this feedback and you're saying, I'm not really sure Steve wants that feedback, but he's telling me he does. So, okay, I think I can do that. And then something comes up, and it's that situation where now you're saying, this is what he's talking about, and I guess I'm going to try to give him that feedback because he asked for it. And so if we have the setting correct and you give me that feedback and I react very defensively and I react negatively, and what are you talking about? And no, come on, that's not it. And I really kind of deflect or avoid or get defensive, what are the chances are that you're going to do that again? Not very high, even though I've asked you to.
Right.
So in the very practical, you identify those 2 or 3 people, but then you have to really check yourself on when I receive that and how I react. Because if I don't react in a way that says I'm welcoming it, you're not going to get it. And so I sometimes train the only thing I can say when you do that is thank you.
Sure.
Because
behind gritted teeth.
Because if I really believe that you are for me and you're not doing that to anger me, you're doing it because you care about me, because you care about my leadership, that's what I got to focus on. And sometimes that's hard to do because I don't want to hear, there are things I don't want to hear. But I know when I've been on leadership teams and we've wrestled with this, it's like one of my other blind spots is that I can be so trusting that I can come off as gullible. Some people trust but verify. I trust first. And then if you prove to me you can't be trusted, okay. But in doing that, sometimes I come off as gullible and I can get hurt by that. And so I've been on a leadership team where I've told someone who actually had a trigger place with that. I said, hey, if I'm ever coming off as gullible, please let me know. And let's have a discussion because I want to know that. And he has said too, if I'm reacting to it, I'll come to you because sometimes I may be being very gullible and I need to take a look at it and own that. And sometimes it may be just about his story and his saboteurs that can be reacting. And so we can have a good discussion. And so if we can own that, that strips the power and the toxicity away from that blind spot. So like I would, say to you, Chris, if I was working here, hey, I don't want to be intrusive. Yes, I'm sociable. Yes, I'm relational. But if I'm overdoing it, please let me know. And then I have to be willing to receive that from you. And that's the, hard look when I look in the mirror and say, okay, you've asked for it.
Right. Yeah.
Can you
absolutely.
receive it?
Yeah, that's really rich. I think there's some good wisdom there, and hard but very simple, practical steps. You can invite somebody in, but like you said, you have to be mentally prepared and emotionally prepared for what that feedback might look like and how then we receive it.
And you might have to set the parameters about when do you give that feedback.
Sure.
Because especially at the start, getting that feedback in a big group
Yep.
is not so lay the boundaries.
Yep.
Hey, we're going to do lunch for this quarter. Let's do lunch, every other week. And in that setting,
Right.
we can have that discussion. And as that leader with the blind spot, it's also good to go into that lunch, let's say, and say, okay, what have you seen me overdo, or what have you seen me that has had a negative impact that maybe I haven't seen? And as a leader seeking that feedback, can you open up the conversation? What are you seeing in my leadership that I don't see that has a negative impact on our team? If you said that, you're going to be more likely to respond to it because I've already opened up the door.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's would be like a really easy, well, not easy, but that first practical step. And if it's coming up over and over again, that's where then to take the next step of getting a good coach to examine it with you.
Yeah.
Read the book. That's an easy one you can do on your own, and get some information from that. But sometimes it takes a person skilled to asking the good questions, to kind of guiding, the process, so that you can develop a different set of skills, so that it doesn't keep occurring over and over again.
Absolutely. Well, this question came to me maybe as an idea to start with, but I wanted to build a lot of the context and curriculum, for lack of a better term. So, as I look out there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of different leadership training styles, paths. There's like the
Sure is.
extreme ownership side of Jocko Willink and what he's doing versus, the retreat we were at. We heard like almost 3 different ideas of what that could look like. So with you stepping into this space, how many years ago was it now that you launched Achilles?
8 years.
Okay, so 8 years ago, as you're launching this, what was it about this positive intelligence framework, and then we talked about the emotional intelligence as well on the team side, that said, this is it, this is what I want to master and bring to people, as opposed to what else might be out there? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, sure it does, and I'll correct a little piece of it, but that's fine.
Please do.
Yeah, I have a master's in social work and went immediately into outpatient therapy in doing that. But I chose a social work degree, and a lot of people don't know that with a MSW, you can do outpatient counseling. They think of social workers as, providing bus fare and different things.
Yeah.
But I was working in a much more clinical sense. But the work that I did for all of those years was really around relationships. I'm a relationship guy. I see relationships get fractured frequently. And so I wanted to help people build healthy relationships. Whether I'm working with a couple in marriage therapy, whether I'm working with a family, or even if I'm working individually with someone, still so much of the focus is around their relationships. And so when I got out of the field for a while and then got back into it, what was really energized me was helping leaders and their teams build and have healthy relationships. And that's what got me started in the corporate world. And I got exposed to a tool that builds relationship intelligence, which is something a little bit different than positive intelligence. But I got trained in a tool to use and got immersed in a number of teams and started to really work on team dynamics and helping bring about changes so that teams could collaborate better, manage conflict more effectively, and do all those things, because people are messy and relationships are messy.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was going through some of my own healing from blowing up my first career, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Not dealing with the blind spots that affected my leadership. And I had done a lot of work around that. And it was a positive intelligence book that came online for me about 3 or 4 years later, after I started with the relationship intelligence piece, that said, this clicks and lands for me. There is a series of book out. There's a book out called Leadership from the Inside Out. It's been around for a while. I gravitated to that early, really liked it. And that guided me and guides leaders through a process of looking at 8 or 9 areas internally that you need to do work on and heal. And I spent a lot of time with that. I've done some teaching from that book, and not to overwhelm your listeners with more resources.
Sure.
But I really liked that book and have used it in my coaching and in my personal life. But then coming across positive intelligence and recognizing that ability to rewire our brain so that we can silence those voices really landed for me. Because whether it was in my therapy career, my counseling career, or in my career working with executives, we're always identifying and talking about those internal drivers, those voices that get in the way. And so because of my relationship bent and my desire to help people have healthy relationships that are functional and that work well, first in their personal lives, in my first career in a sense, and now in the corporate world, it was those things that drew me to this this module, I guess, or this form of treatment. And a lot of good books out there. I use them. I recommend them. And they can bring some good things into our lives. At the same time, if most people are like me, and I think they are, I read a book and I can get through it, and it affects who I am for a month or two, and then it ends up on a shelf, and then I look for the next book.
Yeah.
And I want to do something that is sticky, meaning it will stay with people. It will be transformative. It can transform how they operate, how they lead, how they move in relationships. And I think you need to do both the internal work that positive intelligence does and the external work where, okay, now in a practical way, how do I choose behaviors and use my strengths relationally in a different way so that I can have a better relationship. I can have a relationship I want that works for me and works for you.
Yeah.
And the more insight I can gather about that, just like if we shared our saboteurs with each other, if I know that you have a saboteur that pushes you to be a people pleaser, and we have a relationship of trust and authenticity, then we can help each other with those things, right? We can say, hey, in this behavior, as you interacted with this client when we were pitching this job, I saw this come out, and just something to think about. And it gives us a language, a common language that we can use to encourage each other, to challenge each other, and to grow together. And that's why, I don't know if this kind of answers your question or not, but that's what keeps me drawn and keeps me excited about doing this type of work.
That's a great answer. I think that's rich, so I appreciate that. Obviously, there's a lot more we could dive into, but we always try and keep these compact and full of value. Sure. So to maybe set you up to land the plane here, let me ramble for a second and then maybe give you a good...
I'm glad I won't be the only one rambling then. Thank you.
A good runway. So we've talked about this a lot. You said this quote in one of our founder groups a few months ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. I've gotten pretty close, but something to the effect of, you can't heal experiential wounds through rational intelligence or through logical intelligence. So that's stuck with me for a long time in this, even my own individual path of diving into that. So as we're setting up this conclusion here, we usually, based on the name of the show, like to encourage people, what's the 1 or 2 practical things you can do to go beyond where you are right now and just take that next step and get a little bit better. So with all the tools that we've provided, you have touched on the experiential healing factor of these pieces, and obviously would probably agree that if somebody were to just go read the book and rationally, intelligently understand it, that's not really going to help. There needs to be some experiential healing. So can you maybe, lean into that and give a practical encouragement as we wrap up here of all the things we've touched on, and maybe tying in that story element as well, where as somebody starts to identify how their strengths might be overplayed or the saboteurs come in, like just having a rational understanding of it might not be enough to start like and kickstart that healing and growth and improvement. Is that a helpful lay of the land there?
Yeah, sort of. Well, and it's
I'm trying to blend all the spiderwebs in my
I
head. Yeah.
put all the things together
Yeah.
and make a wonderful little tapestry here. You got the quote, close enough, and that is important. That so often, myself included, we get knowledge. I love knowledge. I would be a professional student if I could have. I love school. Yeah. I love going to school. I could continue to go to school, back in the day. And I love learning things. And books provide that. But the element, that you described, that often when we have experiential wounds, and this taps back into the story element that we haven't talked a lot about, that feeds our blind spots.
Yeah.
Because we learn very early. Those saboteurs come online very early. The ones that they are used in our childhood to help us survive. No matter how good of a home you were raised in, because some of us were raised in a very good home. I was. We don't all have trauma and this type of thing. Yet we still try to figure out in a child's mind, what do I need to do to survive? What do I need to do to be loved, to belong, to be accepted? And we all learn those things in different ways. Those are hard things to shed. And so there are times, you can learn, you can do a lot of learning through book reading and that type of thing, but sometimes you do need experiences that are different. Those experiences can range from, wow, I have a relationship with a coworker or a boss, or a co-leader that's much different than what I've experienced in the past. Or I have a relationship with my spouse, if I'm willing to be authentic and open and honest, that's very different from what I've had in the past. And sometimes it needs to be a deliberate, planned effort through a therapy experience with a therapist. For me, it was a weekend for men that dug into some of these things that provided me an experience of something different than what I had before. And so it gets complicated and a little bit more involved and more intense to get sometimes some of the healing from some of those wounds that you need. And I guess I would say not to be too much of a gloom and doom person here, but the more trauma and the more difficult some of those experiences were, particularly early in life, the more you're going to have to invest some time and energy.
Sure.
To go after them. And oftentimes, when you don't do that, your leadership will be driven by those in ways you don't even recognize.
Right.
And getting set free from that is awesome, exhilarating, and renews your energy.
Yeah.
In fact, the tagline for Achilles Consulting Group, which you may or may not have seen because I don't actually play it up much, is freed to lead. That, if you can be freed from some of those voices, some of those anchors that can drag you down, then your leadership is going to be much more joy-filled, is going to be much more renewing for self and those around you, and much more effective. But I wish there was an easy step to say, how do we heal experiences, right?
Right.
And a good coach, a good therapist can provide some of those for you and begin to talk about that. And I've done everything from, instead of, doing the typical coaching relationship, we're going to take a half a day and go hike the mountains, and we're going to dig into some of these things and challenge them to be willing to take a really deep and honest look at some of those elements of their story. That experience can be transformative too. So.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I realize it's a large question, and I think really the sentiment to get after is, again, not being doom and gloom. It's a lifetime of work, but in a positive way.
Yeah,
and that,
exactly.
Why would you not want to pursue freedom and healing and just a more optimal way of just showing up as a leader? So, I think just encouraging people to, again, just take that first step, lead with some curiosity, get into the resources, and then there's, like you said, an abundance of ways to go about that healing. But I think I was just trying to have a good anchor point to say, like, you can't just read the book and take the knowledge and think everything's going to change overnight.
Right.
You know, you
Yeah,
really have to
sure.
invest in this.
You have to do it. And it goes back to where we started, in a sense. I believe you have to do it relationally. If you want a new experience, that experience occurs within the context of a relationship.
Right.
If you're doing, whether you're doing individual, mind trash, or thought monkeys, I sometimes call them, whether you're doing that work, or whether you're doing how you interact and impact people around you, it's still about a relationship. And so you can't transform things unless you have some type of relationship that you can press into that. And that may be, you know, a colleague or a friend, you know, like at work, you know, as we've talked a little bit before, or, you know, someone in your personal life. You've got to do it in that setting, because if you do it all individual, you're going to get wrapped around the axle and it won't happen.
Sure. Yeah, this would be my encouragement for people to go listen to the episode I just did with Dale Pierce as well, because he talks about the reason he's interested in this business he's jumped into is the epidemic of loneliness in our society right now. And I hear that in your theme as well.
Oh, yeah.
Just huge. Heavily driven by relationships and then leaning into them well. So, yeah, a lot more to unpack there. But, I mean, really, Rich, I sincerely appreciate the wisdom, and I think we've given people a lot of good resources to go look at. So, yeah, thank you for coming in today and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.